It started with a letter printed on soft ivory paper and delivered by certified mail. At first glance, it looked like some kind of estate document, a notice from a mediation service called Equity Kin Resolution Group. The logo was elegant, the tone overly polite. But halfway down the page, just below the phrasing about intra-family property discourse, I saw the words that made my stomach turn to resolve the ownership and equitable use of the Lorne family residence. My name is Kendra Lorne. I'm 31 years old, an interior designer living in Asheville, North Carolina, and as of 6 months ago, the sole legal owner of the house my sister and I grew up in. The word resolve hit like a bruise. There was nothing to resolve. The house was mine. I'd bought it at foreclosure auction after years of watching it fall apart from behind a chain-link fence. I'd painted every wall, refinished every floorboard, and paid every hidden fee the city tacked on after our parents passed. And now, Cassidy, my older sister, 3 years senior, one lifetime more entitled, was apparently questioning whether I had the right to own it alone. It shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. Not because I thought she would be happy for me, but because she never cared until she saw the photos. A month before the letter arrived, I had shared a single picture of the finished kitchen. White oak cabinets, sage green tile, backsplash, open shelving, warm lighting. It had taken me 3 weekends and 2 burnt fingers to grout the tile just right. I only posted it because Rosa, my design assistant, insisted I should show my work sometimes. I hadn't tagged the location. I hadn't written a caption, but Cassidy saw it anyway. She always does. She commented 2 words. Our kitchen. Not great job, Kendra. Not proud of you, just our. It had been 10 years since she'd lived there. She'd left the house before the taxes piled up, before the foreclosure notice came, before our father's toolbox was sold to cover the water bills. I stayed. I watched the paint peel and the weeds rise through the porch steps. I walked past it on my way to the bus stop every day, even when I couldn't afford the gas to drive across town. And when the city auctioned it off for $4,600, I drained my savings borrowed against my business account and placed the only bid. No one else even showed up. I spent 3 months sanding, patching, rebuilding. It wasn't glamorous. It was lonely and dusty, and some nights I cried from exhaustion just sitting on the floor, but I did it. I brought it back. For me. For no one else. And yet, Cassidy wanted to talk about equitable use. Like the house was a family heirloom, she had equal rights too. Never mind that she hadn't called on my birthday in 3 years or shown up for the funeral when Dad passed. I placed the letter down on the counter next to the bowl of half-peeled lemons I'd planned to roast with salmon that night. The scent of citrus hung in the air, sharp and honest. I looked at the soft ivory paper and felt something colder than anger resolve. Because this wasn't just about a house. Cassidy and I had always lived in 2 different realities. In hers, she was the firstborn, the voice of the family, the one who always got the bigger slice, the front seat, the credit. I was the background character, the reliable one, the quiet fixer who didn't ask for thanks, but this time I hadn't waited for permission. I didn't call a family meeting. I didn't announce what I was doing. I just did it. And now that the house was clean and finished and standing proud again, Cassidy suddenly wanted back in. I remember her voice on the phone the day after I posted that kitchen photo. It was casual at first, sugar-coated in sisterly nostalgia. Kendra, she said, I can't believe how beautiful the place looks. You really brought it back. It's so good to see our childhood home again. I was quiet. Then she added, just as casually, let me know. When's a good time for me to come down and stay for a bit? Maybe we can make some decisions together about the future of the place. I didn't say anything at the time, just hung up and stared at the wall. She never asked how I bought it. She just asked when she could move back in. The mediation office was tucked inside a quiet plaza on the west side of town, the kind of place you'd expect to find a dentist or a financial advisor. Nothing flashy. Just polished concrete floors, a neutral-toned lobby, and a receptionist who greeted me like I was checking in for a routine appointment. I gave my name Kendra Lorne, and she handed me a clipboard I didn't ask for and gestured toward the glass-paneled conference room down the hall. They're ready for you. They, not she. That was the first clue. I had told myself all week that this would be a conversation, a misunderstanding. Cassidy had always been dramatic, yes, but we were adults now. Surely this was her misguided attempt to reconnect or save face. Maybe she wanted to talk about boundaries or just air out old family dust. I didn't expect reconciliation, but I didn't expect an ambush either. I wore a navy blue blazer I hadn't touched since my last trade conference, and packed nothing but a slim folder of purchase receipts just in case. But I wasn't walking in blind. 2 days earlier, after that letter landed on my counter, I called Sandra Cho. Sandra had once been the closing attorney for one of my design clients, and I remembered how clean and deliberate her language was, like every word she said had already been filed in triplicate. We weren't close, but I trusted her more than anyone else who would take my call on short notice. Now, as I walked toward the conference room, she stepped into stride beside me, her tone calm and low. "Remember," she said, without breaking eye contact with the door ahead, "you don't have to prove your worth, just your ownership." I nodded once, and together we entered. Cassidy was already seated at the far end of the long rectangular table. Her outfit was carefully curated cream blouse, silk scarf, gold earrings that matched the thin chain resting on her collarbone. The whole look screamed restraint with just enough flair to say I belong in charge. She stood to greet me, smiling like this was brunch. "Kenny," she said, using a nickname I hadn't heard since we were teenagers. "You look nice." I offered a nod, nothing more. A man I didn't recognize stood behind her early 40s tailored charcoal suit, slicked back hair briefcase on the chair beside him. Cassidy gestured toward him with practiced warmth. "This is Nate Wilkins. He's our family mediator." He didn't shake my hand, just offered a tight-lipped smile and motioned toward a chair. Sandra sat down first. I followed. Nate began with a script that sounded like it had been used 1,000 times. "We're here today for a respectful dialogue between family members regarding shared property and emotional equity." Emotional equity. That was new. Cassidy leaned forward slightly. "This isn't about taking anything away from you, Kendra. I just think we need to talk about what's fair. That house is part of our legacy. We both grew up there. We both have memories attachments. I paid for it," I said, gently but firmly. Cassidy didn't flinch. "Of course, and I'm not minimizing that, but I think it's important to recognize the emotional investment too." I spoke with a property advisor who said that Sandra cleared her throat softly. Cassidy stopped. Nate interjected. "To facilitate clarity, we've drafted a proposal. Nothing binding, just a framework for discussion." He pulled a cream-colored folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table to me. Inside was a multi-page document labeled Family Use and Shared Ownership Agreement. The key phrases were clear. Cassidy was requesting 50% equity based on emotional contribution and familial legacy. There was even a clause about rotating occupancy. I closed the folder. "This is not a conversation, this is a claim." Cassidy gave a gentle shrug. "It's just a starting point. I thought we could find a middle ground. For the sake of our family." I turned to Sandra. She reached into her own leather folio and pulled out a set of documents copies of the original foreclosure purchase, the deed transfer bank statements showing the down payment from my account itemized renovation receipts. She placed them neatly on the table one by one without raising her voice. Then she looked directly at Nate. "My client is the sole legal owner of the property in question. She acquired it through public auction, paid all associated fees and taxes, and holds the only valid deed recorded with the Buncombe County Register of Deeds." Cassidy's smile faltered. Sandra continued, "Any claim of shared ownership would require proof of financial contribution, contractual agreement, or legal partnership. None exist. Emotional attachment is not a legal basis for ownership." There was a long pause. Cassidy's fingers tapped lightly on the table. Nate shifted in his seat. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I just folded my hands in my lap and met my sister's gaze. She looked at me like I'd changed, like I'd grown teeth. She had brought a lawyer, but so had I, and now her smile, meticulously assembled, socially calibrated, was beginning to vanish. It took less than 48 hours for the whispers to start. I hadn't even put the mediation folder back in the filing cabinet when my phone lit up with a call from Aunt Lila. She wasn't my aunt by blood. She had married into the Lorne side decades ago and never left even after the divorce, but she still called on birthdays and sent lavender soap at Christmas, so I picked up. Her voice was soft and wet at the edges. "Sweetheart," she said, drawing out the word like a sigh I just heard about what happened between you and your sister. "I'm heartbroken." There it was. Not confused? Not surprised? Heartbroken. I said nothing at first, waiting for her to clarify what exactly had broken. But she pressed on. "Cassidy called me yesterday. She sounded so hurt, Kendra. She said she tried everything to keep it civil, but you lawyered up and blindsided her." She brought the lawyer I said evenly. She said it wasn't like that, Lila whispered, like she was passing state secrets. She said, "You're pushing her out of the family home like you don't want to share anything from your childhood, that this was about control, not fairness." I took a breath and let it go slowly. "Did she also tell you I bought the house outright from the city after she let it fall apart for a decade?" Silence. Then carefully she said she didn't know you were even trying to buy it. She didn't ask. Lila made a small sound of disappointment, the kind you save for children who don't share their toys. "Well," she said, "I'm not taking sides. I just want the two of you to remember that family comes first." I hung up before I said something I'd regret. That afternoon, Cassidy posted a photo on Instagram of her standing in front of a white picket fence that very much resembled the one our old house used to have before I replaced it with cedar slats. Her caption read, "Some of us fight for what family means, some just by silence." The comments rolled in quickly. Old high school friends, distant cousins, even our old piano teacher chimed in with variations of, "You deserve better, girl. Your sister's always been cold. Don't let money ruin the bond." I hadn't posted anything, hadn't said a word publicly, but somehow I'd become the villain. Rosa noticed it first. She knocked gently on my office door, holding her phone like it was toxic. "Hey!" So I didn't want to bring this up if it didn't matter, but "Have you seen this?" She turned her screen toward me. A blog post, anonymous of course, titled, "Designer Destroys Her Sister's Rightful Claim to Childhood Home." Subhead: When property becomes more important than people. I skimmed the first few lines. They didn't use names, but the details were unmistakable. 2 sisters. 1 house. One obsessed with control, the other with family. It was written like a tabloid sermon, righteous, vague, and deeply invasive. Rosa stood quietly while I read, shifting from foot to foot like a kid waiting for detention to begin. She was 27, fiercely competent and fiercely loyal, but I could see the question flicker behind her eyes. Was any of it true? "It's a smear job," I said, setting the phone down. "Probably one of Cassidy's friends, or her." Rosa nodded but didn't quite relax. "I figured. I just thought you should know before—" "Well, before what?" She hesitated. "We were in final talks with that couple from the Blue Ridge Project. They emailed this morning. Said they were going in another direction. No reason given. But I saw one of them like the blog post on Facebook last night. I closed my eyes and sat back. It didn't sting the way it used to. It burned lower, slower, like something deep under the ribs that wasn't sharp enough to scream but wouldn't stop aching. "I'll reach out to them anyway," I said, though I knew I wouldn't. "I can flag the post report it Rosa offered." "No, let it sit." I opened a drawer and pulled out a legal pad. The truth always looks quiet at first. "That's fine. We'll build louder." She nodded, then paused. "You okay?" I looked at her for a long second. Rosa had joined me 2 years ago, fresh out of a community design program, all energy and no filter. She'd helped me tile the bathroom in the Lorne house and cried when we found the old family photo tucked inside the mirror cabinet. She didn't know the full history, but she knew enough. "I'm fine," I said. "But I'm not backing down." The words felt simple but solid, like steel set into place. They were watching Cassidy, the relatives, the clients who cared more about optics than ownership. But I had worked too hard to be erased with one Instagram caption. There's a certain kind of silence that doesn't mean peace. It's the kind that settles into your inbox like dust, into your bones like weight. That's the silence I sat in for the next 3 days after the blog post, after the lost client, after the family phone calls pretending to be neutral while carefully choosing their side. I considered going public. I drafted a long post twice, laying it all out, the purchase documents, the renovation costs, the years. Cassidy didn't return a single call when Dad got sick. I even attached a scanned copy of the auction receipt just to be thorough. But when I reached the last line, the cursor blinked at me like a dare. Posting it would feel good for 5 minutes. But then what Sandra called that afternoon, her voice calm, steady, like always. I told her about the blog about the client, about how Rosa kept asking if we should make a statement. Sandra didn't miss a beat. No, let the noise burn itself out. We're going to build the truth instead. She said it like a blueprint. Start gathering everything, she continued. Proof of payment, renovation timelines, property tax statements, contracts with your labor crew. If it's got a date and a $sign, scan it. I have receipts, I said. I want them in folders, digitized, ordered by month. It was the kind of task that would normally make me groan, but right now it felt like purpose. I pulled out a banker box from the bottom shelf of the office closet and started sifting. Tile receipts, lumberyard bills, electrical permits, paint samples with handwritten notes on drying time. I built that house twice, once in wood and sweat, now in paper. Each folder I labeled felt like reclaiming something. A moment. A choice. Proof. Later that night, while looking for the plumbing receipts from the basement repair, I found something I hadn't meant to keep. It was tucked into a manila envelope with the word private, written in my mother's handwriting. I recognized it immediately, the same all-caps print she used on chore charts and freezer labels. I sat on the floor back against the filing cabinet and opened it. Inside was a letter, folded twice, dated 3 weeks before she passed. Kendra, if you're reading this, then your sister's probably still making you feel like you have to earn your place at the table. Don't. I know Cassidy takes up space, she always has, but that doesn't mean she sees more clearly. You have always done the work quietly. That's not weakness, that's power. I hope you're doing something with your hands, something you love. And I hope you stopped waiting for her to cheer you on. Some people clap for themselves. Some people build their own stage. You don't need her permission, baby. Build your own. Love, Mom. I read it 3 times before folding it back up. Not because I didn't understand it the first time, but because I needed to believe that someone had seen me, really seen me. Not the younger sister, not the backup plan, just me. In the weeks before she died, Mom had been different. Not softer, just sharper, less filtered. I remembered sitting at her hospital bedside trying to explain why I'd taken on a second job to save for the house and her, just nodding like she already knew. You won't win with noise, she'd said. You'll win with roots. That night, I scanned the letter and filed it under a folder labeled Legacy. Not for court, not for Cassidy, for me. Because maybe silence wasn't the absence of a fight. Maybe it was a tool, a boundary, a weapon if used right. I wouldn't post a single thing. Not a rebuttal, not a defense. I would keep building. And when the dust settled, I'd still be standing next to the truth, next to the home I rebuilt from the floor, joists up. The day I noticed the table was gone, I wasn't looking for it. I had gone into the storage room behind the garage to pull out a box of extra curtain rods for a staging project, but something felt off. The room was clean, the air cool and musty like always, but the corner beneath the hanging shop light looked emptier than it should have. It wasn't until I stood in the doorway for a few extra seconds that the gap fully registered. The antique cherrywood table, Dad's table, wasn't there. The tarp that had always been draped over it now hung in a loose pile on the floor like someone had tossed it aside carelessly. For a second, I thought maybe I'd moved it during the renovations and forgotten. Or maybe Rosa had helped a client borrow it for a photo shoot and we'd just overlooked it. But something in my gut told me otherwise. That table had been with us longer than most furniture in the house. Dad built it during one of the roughest years we ever had when Mom lost her job at the hospital, and he took on every handyman gig he could find. It started as a stack of rough-sawn planks in the driveway and slowly became a place where we did everything: math homework, birthday candles, late-night snacks, even Cassidy's college applications. It wasn't just wood. It was survival. I sent Rosa a text and asked if she'd seen it recently. She replied within minutes and asked if I was home. 5 minutes later, she was at the back door, phone in hand, and a strange look on her face. I didn't know if I should tell you, she said, stepping in carefully. But when I saw it wasn't in the storage room, I remembered this. She opened her gallery app and pulled up a screenshot. It was a Facebook Marketplace listing from 2 years ago. The photo was unmistakable. Dad's table, the leg with the chipped finish, the faint burn mark on the edge from when Cassidy left a curling iron too close. Listed for $400, location, Asheville. Seller's name, Cassidy Lorne. I stared at the screen for a long moment. My mouth was dry. You saved this. I saw it back when she posted it, Rosa said. Didn't think much of it at the time, just figured maybe it was a similar table. But then I saw the caption. She swiped once. The listing read, Vintage handmade cherry table family heirloom no longer needed. No longer needed. Cassidy hadn't just sold it. She'd erased it, declared it irrelevant, like it was just another object that didn't serve her anymore. I felt something hot rise in my throat, but I swallowed it before it could turn into sound. Do you want me to look into the buyer? Rosa asked quietly. No, I said. It's done. But it wasn't really. That night, I sat in the kitchen, my kitchen at the counter, where I had started laying out the legal folders with Sandra. I took one of the blank tabs and wrote missing things in block letters. It wasn't for court, it wasn't even for closure, it was just for me. I wrote cherrywood table. Dad built it in '97, sold by Cassidy in 2021 without telling me. Then I sat back and tried to remember the sound Dad made when he was sanding that tabletop in the garage. He used to hum when he worked, not a tune, just a low, steady sound like he was keeping time with the world. The house had been falling apart then. The roof leaked, the dryer gave up every other month, and Mom was constantly on the phone with creditors. But he built that table like we were already rich. When Cassidy first asked for the power of attorney to handle the estate sale, I'd said yes. I was too exhausted to argue back then, still reeling from Mom's cancer treatments and Dad's sudden stroke. I had trusted her to sort through things fairly. I never thought to ask about the table. I just assumed she would know. I had been wrong about a lot of things. This was just the most visible. It wasn't the money that stung, it was the story. The hours of labor, the meals eaten on that surface, the fingerprints we probably left behind 1,000 times over. She had taken all of that and turned it into a transaction, a post, a price, and now it was gone. I stared at the blank folder sitting in front of me and realized something that caught me off guard. This fight, this entire thing wasn't just about a house. It was about what happens when people who don't build try to take from those who do, when memory gets rewritten by the louder voice, when the things you sweat for get reduced to hours just because someone else remembers them too. Dad built that table with a dull saw, a borrowed belt sander, and nothing but stubborn will. He didn't have a degree in woodworking or a plan. He just wanted something solid we could gather around when everything else was falling apart. That table had survived 20 years. It hadn't survived my sister. It had been at least 5 years since I last walked up the stone steps to Mrs. Henrietta Weaver's front porch. But nothing about the house had changed. Same blue shutters, same wind chimes, shaped like copper spoons, same stubborn rosebush that climbed the side of the railing no matter how often she trimmed it. I knocked once, lightly. She was already opening the door before I could knock again. Well, if it isn't little Kendra Lorne, she said with a half smile, and a full apron, her reading glasses hanging around her neck by a beaded chain. Thought I might be seeing you sooner or later. I hadn't even told her I was coming. Word traveled fast in our part of Asheville, especially among the older neighbors who still read the paper and watched everything from behind half-closed blinds. I followed her, inside the smell of lemon balm and something warm and sweet hanging in the air. I heard there's some noise coming from your sister's side of the fence, she said as we settled into her sunroom. And I figured you might want to hear something. I paused. You heard something? Henrietta picked up her phone from the tray beside her tea. Not heard. Saved. Then she tapped through her voicemail app and adjusted the volume. The recording began with a few seconds of background noise. Wind, maybe a car door. Then Cassidy's voice clear and confident speaking. Fast, like she didn't know she was being recorded. I know she thinks she's got everything locked up, but trust me, I'll get that house back without lifting a damn hammer. One meeting, one signature. She's never been the fighter anyway. The message cut off there. Henrietta didn't say anything right away. She just set the phone down gently and watched me. I swallowed hard. When did she leave that? About 2 weeks ago. She must have butt-dialed me while talking to someone else lawyer maybe, or one of those real estate friends of hers. I recognized the voice right away, but I kept it to myself. I wasn't going to take sides. Until I read that garbage blog. Her eyes narrowed behind the glasses. That girl's got a sharp tongue and a short memory. But what she doesn't have is sense, or decency. I stared at the woven rug beneath my feet, the familiar pattern of reds and greens we used to track mud across as kids when we visited her house for cookies after school. You kept the voicemail all this time, I figured you might need it. And if you don't, someone else might. She leaned forward, her tone softening. You always had your hands full with that sister of yours. The minute she saw something pretty, she thought it was hers. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. I'm trying not to make this ugly. Henrietta shook her head gently. Honey, it already is. But ugly doesn't mean loud. You don't have to shout to be right. I looked up. If this goes to court, if it gets that far, would you be willing to, I don't know, give a statement? Be a witness? Her eyes didn't waver. I already printed the voicemail transcript. I'll do whatever you need. There was a comfort in her conviction that I hadn't let myself feel in weeks. Someone else saw it, heard it. Someone who knew us before we became a tug-of-war headline. Someone who remembered the quiet version of me, the one who fixed things while Cassidy claimed credit. As I walked back to the house, I let my hand drag along the top of Henrietta's iron fence chipped with rust, but still holding. Like everything in that neighborhood, it had outlived storms, city budget cuts, and half-hearted repairs. But it stood because someone kept tending to it year after year, even when no one said thank you. At home, I added a new folder to the growing file, Witness Materials. Inside it, I placed the printed transcript Henrietta had handed me, the CD she burned of the voicemail, and a small handwritten note she'd added in her even cursive recorded Feb. 3:12 p.m. left unintentionally. I slipped the folder beside the others and stared at the growing row, each one a boundary I never planned to draw, but now couldn't afford not to. Cassidy wanted to win without lifting a hammer, but I'd been building all along, and now other people were starting to see it too. The envelope was cream-colored, thicker than the kind that held junk coupons or appointment reminders. It was tucked precisely between a glossy hardware catalog and a stiff property tax notice. Rosa handed it to me wordlessly, her eyes briefly grazing the return address, Pritchard & Lowe's, PLLC. Cassidy had hired a new attorney. I stared at it for a moment before slipping my finger under the flap. I'd braced myself for more boilerplate accusations, another vague threat, or some new spin on the same tired narrative. But as I unfolded the letter at my desk, I paused. This one was different. The phrasing wasn't about deeds or renovations or sale disputes. It was about something more abstract, slippery, emotional. I reread the line that made me pause. Our client asserts her long-standing emotional attachment to the Lorne property and seeks appropriate legal remedy for her exclusion from a space of significant familial and psychological importance. Psychological importance. They were trying to sue me over memories. I leaned back in my chair, letting the paper drop slightly from my hand. So this was her new move appeal to sentiment play, the victim suggest I was heartless for restoring the very house she hadn't lifted a finger to touch since foreclosure. Now, suddenly, it was significant. Sandra arrived barely an hour later, striding into my office with her laptop bag and the kind of focused energy that made the room feel 10 degrees cooler. She had her hair in a no-nonsense twist, and her expression said she'd seen the letter too. She's pivoting, Sandra said without preamble, setting her things down at the conference table. They can't touch your title, and the financials are airtight, so they're going for narrative now. Emotional leverage. They want to paint you as the cold sister who pushed her out. I exhaled sharply. She's always been better at playing the part. Sandra didn't respond with a smirk. She reached into her bag and pulled out a red-labeled folder. Good thing she's also sloppy. She flipped open a zoning file I hadn't seen before. "This," she said, turning her screen toward me, "is a signed affidavit Cassidy submitted to the city's zoning office last spring, months after your purchase closed." I leaned in, scanning the document. She was requesting an easement variance, Sandra explained, for a renovation she couldn't legally make because she didn't own the property. She claimed she was the primary familial stakeholder. I read aloud, almost laughing. Based on what childhood birthdays, she submitted no deed, no authority, just an outdated photo of the house and a paragraph citing your parents' former ownership. The city flagged it as unverified. But Sandra tapped the bottom line. She signed it under penalty of perjury. I stared at the screen. The signature, unmistakable. "Can we use this?" Sandra's smile this time was sharp. "Oh, we will. Not just as a rebuttal, but as proof she's willing to fabricate claims to get what she wants. It undermines everything she's trying to argue now." She started drafting a formal response attaching deeds, renovation permits, the zoning misrepresentation, and a full timeline of events. I watched her work, but my mind drifted. It should have felt like a win, like vindication, but instead all I felt was worn, not defeated, just tired. Tired of carrying the burden of being careful, responsible, silent, of constantly building while Cassidy postured. Growing up, she was the star, the one who twirled into every room, pulling all attention toward her orbit. Cassidy, with her pageant curls, her dramatic stories, her strategic tears, and I was the helper. The one who ran errands, cleaned up, stayed late, kept the peace. I used to tell myself that I chose the background, that it was easier, that I liked it. But the truth was, Cassidy never asked me to be small. She just filled every available inch of space, and I let her. Even when Dad passed, when Mom got sick, when I stayed behind to manage estates and bank forms, while Cassidy uploaded sepia-toned throwbacks with captions like "Always Daddy's Girl," no one asked who was doing the actual work. They noticed who cried the loudest, not who stayed the longest. But now, finally the work was visible. The rebuilt porch, the rewired basement, the stack of permits with my name on every page. It wasn't about applause, but it meant something. That the silence I'd worked in had become my strongest evidence. Sandra glanced up. "You okay?" I nodded slower than I meant to. I used to think she'd always win, just because she was louder. And now I folded the zoning letter and slipped it into the file. Now, I think my work speaks louder than her name. Sandra closed her laptop gently. "Blood isn't a contract, Kendra. She keeps trying to make your shared past a claim on your present. But courts don't run on nostalgia. They run on proof." That sentence struck deep. Cassidy wasn't just grasping for property, she was grasping for control of a legacy she never earned. She wanted the rewards of belonging without doing the labor of building. She wanted credit for a home she never fought for. I picked up the draft response. "Let's finish it." Because this wasn't just a legal fight. It was a reckoning for every time I had been dismissed, every time I had been told I was the backup plan, the fallback daughter. I was done letting silence be mistaken for weakness. And I was done letting blood rewrite what I had bled to build. I hadn't planned on going through the basement that night. I just needed a break. Something quiet. Something that didn't require strategy or defense. The mediation date was looming. Sandra was finalizing a second round of filings, and Cassidy had gone completely silent. That kind of silence wasn't peace, it was preparation. So I found myself standing in the basement, surrounded by forgotten furniture and dust-covered boxes, craving the simple act of sorting through something that couldn't argue back. Most of the cartons were labeled in Mom's sharp cursive ex-Maz decor old tack stuff kitchen. Fragile. But one box in the far corner was different. Just ledger scrawled in fading black Sharpie across the side. I hesitated. It could have been anything: Dad's hardware logs, warranty manuals, maybe a donation record from church. But something tugged at me. So I pulled it out, sneezed through the layer of dust, and peeled back the flaps. Inside, beneath a folded towel, was a single navy, cloth-bound notebook, the kind Mom used to keep for holiday plans. I opened the cover. Her handwriting greeted me immediately, familiar and steady, personal notes household plus girls. I sat on the cold basement step and began flipping pages. The first few were unremarkable grocery expenses, oil change reminders, water bills, but 10 pages in a heading caught me. Loans plus gifts given to girls Kendra and Cassidy. It was underlined in thick pen. Each entry beneath it was dated, organized, exactly the way Mom always managed things. I skimmed down Cassidy's column first. $1, $200 for car repairs, $5,000 for a summer abroad program she never finished, $500 for her first apartment deposit in Raleigh, then $2,000 more when she broke that lease and moved in with a boyfriend no one ever met. The list kept going. Rent, subsidies, boutique job layoffs, credit card payoffs, even a line about $900 for emergency designer suit court appearance. By the end, the number totaled $72,480, scribbled in parentheses beside it, excluding holiday cash gifts. I turned the page and found my column. It was shorter, tighter. A few entries for grad school textbooks, $800 for a wisdom tooth extraction, a small loan when Mom's hospital bills spiked, which I had paid back 3 months later. My total, $370. And then, just beneath the last line of my column in firmer strokes was a note that stopped me cold. If you find this note, I always saw who gave and who only asked. I didn't cry. Not then. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was steadier than grief, like something inside me had finally clicked into place. For years I had wondered if Mom noticed if she'd seen the imbalance, the quiet divide between me and Cassidy. And here it was. In her words. In her own unshakable ink. She saw it all. Cassidy always knew how to ask, and ask loudly, with urgency drama and a sense that the world owed her something. I, on the other hand, waited. I waited until no one else showed up, until Mom was too tired to say no, until bills quietly became mine to handle. I gave without announcing it. But someone had been paying attention. I closed the ledger slowly, holding it like something sacred. I carried it upstairs into my office and gently scanned the pages into a new folder on my drive, Maternal Records Unfiled Truths. Whether Sandra would use it in court, I didn't know. But for me, it was already evidence, not of debt, but of acknowledgement. Later that evening, I remembered a night just months before Mom passed. We were in the kitchen, me chopping vegetables, her in a blanket sipping tea. Cassidy had called twice that day, asking for help with storage bins, but never showed. I was sautéing onions when Mom said almost to herself, "I know which one of you checks the locks." She didn't say more. She never needed to. And now, in a dusty old ledger no one else would have thought to find, she'd left one more confirmation. A quiet one. But it was enough. I slipped the notebook into the fire-safe box with my deed, my receipts, and Henrietta's affidavit. I placed it beside a folded letter from the bank, the very first approval I'd received when I made the offer on this house. Before closing the box, I whispered, "Thanks, Mom. I needed this." Because even if it never entered a courtroom, that little cloth-bound book had already done its work. It had told the truth. The kind that lives between lines and inside mothers who never forget the shape of who carried what. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. Sandra never raised her voice. She didn't need to. When she walked into my office that morning carrying a thick accordion folder and 2 lattes, I knew something was about to shift. Her heels clicked with surgical precision across the hardwood floor, her blazer crisp, her expression sharper than usual. She set 1 latte in front of me, then slid into the chair across the table with that tight, precise smile she wore when she was about to go for the jugular with receipts. Ready to go on offense, she asked, peeling back the Velcro on the folder. I nodded, more tired than nervous now. The past few weeks had worn me down in ways I hadn't fully acknowledged. Cassidy's constant maneuvering, the whisper campaigns, the social posts, meant to humiliate me without naming me. It had all chipped away at something quiet, but essential. But today wasn't about defense. Today we pushed back. Sandra pulled the first document from the folder and laid it flat on the table. "Formal cease and desist," she said. "Filed this morning and served via courier to both Cassidy and her attorney. It outlines the defamation, the ownership dispute, the harassment, all of it. She tapped the paper, then moved on. Exhibit A, purchase contracts. Bank statements, loan approval, and notarized sale records showing the exact transfer of ownership from the bank to you. Clean, unambiguous, airtight. She flipped to the next section. Exhibit B, renovation invoices. Every material purchase, subcontractor. Invoice permit approval, and dated receipt. Some even have before and after photos attached. She slid over a sheet of images, my shattered porch, the collapsed ceiling above the staircase, the broken kitchen tile I'd spent 2 nights repairing with a borrowed belt sander and pure stubbornness. These aren't cosmetic upgrades, she said. They're structural reinvestments. You didn't just occupy this home, you rebuilt it. Sandra flipped again. Exhibit C, Henrietta's affidavit, hand-signed and notarized. Includes a transcript of the voicemail Cassidy accidentally left her. You know, the one where she gloated about getting the house back without lifting a hammer. Henrietta also confirmed she's willing to testify. That one landed harder than the rest. Henrietta wasn't just a neighbor, she'd been our babysitter, our porch sitter, the keeper of spare keys and missing mittens. I never imagined she'd end up between me and Cassidy. But then again, Cassidy had made this a war. We were all just the terrain. Sandra turned another page. Exhibit D, social media screenshots. Cassidy's not-so-subtle Instagram captions. The blog post with a quote from her implying your ownership was morally illegitimate. And this, she paused, sliding a printout across the table. It was a caption under a photo of Cassidy standing outside a vintage door frame, our old house I realized from a year ago. Can't wait to reclaim what's mine. Blood contracts. My jaw tightened. She hadn't just implied things. She'd declared war publicly. Sandra's voice took on that deliberate coolness she saved for people who mistook kindness for weakness. That language is why our letter lands with force. We made it clear any further defamation, manipulation, or false claims of entitlement will move us directly into court. Depositions, press access, financial discovery. I stared at the last page. Sandra's final line read like a steel trap. Next step will be court, with press depositions and discovery. She won't want that, Sandra said. Cassidy lives off image. The second a judge starts pulling back the curtain, it's over. She always thought charm would save her, I murmured. Sandra didn't flinch. Charm doesn't hold up in court. Documentation does. And you, Kendra, have documentation in spades. An hour later, we received confirmation both Cassidy and her attorney had accepted the documents. Signed, logged. By late afternoon, Rosa came into the office holding her phone with wide eyes. You need to see this, she said, handing it to me. It was a screenshot of a post from a niche legal blog, the kind that specialized in small-town lawsuits and local courthouse whispers. The headline was short but explosive. Attorney drops client in Lorne property dispute. Cites conflict of strategy. I blinked. He quit. Rosa nodded. Word is he advised her to settle. She refused. He walked. My stomach didn't leap. No rush of triumph, no fists in the air, just a strange, hollow stillness. Cassidy wasn't regrouping. She was unraveling, and part of me, some tired, buried part, felt pity I didn't want. She won't go quietly, I said aloud. Sandra, now back at the table reviewing files, looked up, then let her go loudly. We've already won. Outside, dusk softened the edges of the house I'd poured myself into. The porch light came on automatically now, something I wired myself after watching 3 YouTube tutorials and electrocuting exactly 0 things. The deck I'd rebuilt from salvaged cedar boards still held the scent of oil and labor, and in that moment, something clicked into place. Cassidy had always been the one who spoke louder, who claimed more, who walked into rooms and made the air shift with her presence. But for once, I wasn't chasing the volume. I had substance, paper, proof, power that didn't come from performance, but from precision. This isn't just about her, I said to Sandra, turning from the window. It's about every year I was told I had to be smaller so she could be seen. Sandra looked up, nodded once, and said, Not anymore. The folder was thick with facts, but more than that, it was filled with something Cassidy never saw coming. the quiet, determined voice of someone who stopped apologizing for building something real. And now, for the first time, that voice had legal weight. Let her try another angle. Let her post another story. My foundation was solid and her footing was slipping fast. The news came not with fireworks or a slammed door, but a quiet email from Sandra. Subject line, re Cassidy Lorne. Withdrawal of claims. No formal apology, no explanation, no olive branch. Just a clean legal PDF signed not even by Cassidy's original lawyer, but a junior associate from a different firm entirely. Cassidy had officially dropped all claims. Sandra's follow-up note was clinical and short. All filings rescinded. No further legal pursuit expected. We're closing the folder unless anything else arises. And that was it. No courtroom drama. No final confrontation. No emotional unraveling from Cassidy. No cathartic confession. Just an ending. Untidy, unresolved, unceremonious, but final. I sat alone in my office when I read it, the ceiling fan above me clicking faintly, rotating with its usual tired rhythm. Late afternoon light streamed through the blinds, casting long golden stripes across my desk. Outside, the street was quiet except for the occasional sound of a passing car or a dog barking in the distance. Rosa peeked in through the half-open door, saw my expression, and stepped inside without saying a word. "It's over?" she asked gently. I nodded, not looking up. She dropped everything. She didn't clap, didn't let out a cheer or make any kind of celebratory gesture. Instead, she walked around the desk and sat on the edge, her eyes scanning my face. "So, how do you feel?" I blinked. I had expected that question, expected it would come the moment I shared the news. But the answer didn't rise in me like I thought it would. "Not angry," I said slowly. "Not even relieved. Just done." Rosa tilted her head, studying me. "You wanted her to say something. Admit it." "No," I said instinctively, then paused. "Maybe. I don't know. I guess I thought somewhere in the paperwork maybe there'd be a note, a sentence, something human. Some trace of acknowledgement that we'd once shared, a life, a family, a history, something to say, I know what I did, or at least, I remember what mattered to us, but there wasn't, just silence. Cold, bureaucratic silence that didn't accuse, didn't apologize, didn't explain. And maybe that was the answer in itself. Rosa let out a long exhale and offered a small, thoughtful smile. "You know what I think," she said after a moment. "You're the kind of woman I want to become." I looked up, startled. "What, you stayed steady," she said. "You didn't humiliate her. You didn't lash out. You didn't fight for show. You just stood your ground, protected what you built. You don't need an apology. You already won." I felt something shift then. Not pride, something quieter than that. Something steadier. A stillness that had been earned, not given. After she left, I sat for a while longer, watching the dust float through the slanted sunlight. Then, I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out the blue leather-bound notebook I kept for moments that didn't belong in files or folders. This was the place for thoughts too personal to speak aloud, too delicate for documents. I flipped to the last page and began to write my pen, moving slowly, deliberately. I protected the house. But I also protected myself. This wasn't about a deed, or a lawn, or even the bones of the house my father had hammered into place during his hardest years. It was about reclaiming a part of myself that had gone quiet long ago. The self I used to shrink, the version of me that always stood 2 steps behind Cassidy, unsure if I had the right to step forward. For so many years, I had mistaken silence for peace and obedience for love. I had learned to survive in the shadow, but this time, I didn't back away. I didn't hand over the keys, literally or figuratively. I didn't wait for someone else to affirm what I already knew to be true. I had stayed. I had stood. I had kept what I built. There were no phone calls from relatives, no awkward messages from extended family, just a still, intentional quiet, and for the first time, I didn't try to fill it. I let it be. I let it sit in the corners of the room between the chair legs and the picture frames. I let it settle into the floorboards. I let it move through me like cool air after a storm, unexpected but cleansing. Outside, the wind picked up rustling the branches of the backyard trees. The wind chimes Henrietta had gifted me, newly polished, gently hung by the porch window, sang out a few clear, calming notes. I closed my eyes and listened. There was no dramatic conclusion, no roaring justice. But there was the sound of peace arriving not like a parade, but like a whisper. Peace doesn't always come with trumpets. Sometimes it arrives when you stop explaining who you are and simply live like you know it. The house had quieted, not in the hollow way it once echoed during sleepless nights, but in a settled way like it finally belonged to itself again. Or maybe to me. It had taken nearly 2 years, 2 jobs, a small army of receipts, and 1 very determined attorney. But now, the house breathed on its own terms, and so did I. The silence no longer hummed with grief or fear. It had become space. Space to dream. That spring, I realized it wasn't enough to live in something I saved. I needed to build forward on purpose with people for something more than just myself. Healing had a ceiling if you kept it contained. I wanted to raise the roof on what was possible. The idea came one late morning while I was sanding an old cabinet door in the garage. The light filtered through the dusty window panes in that way that made everything look softer. Rosa walked in holding 2 iced coffees, sweat dotting her brow, and said, "What if we taught this?" "Taught what?" She motioned around the space at the paint cans, the power tools, the stacked wood. This, tools permits costs, clawing something back from the edge. I stared at her stunned, because she had said out loud what had been whispering in my chest for months, but hadn't yet taken form. That week, I filed the paperwork for a nonprofit. I called it Design Forward. The name felt right-rooted in craft, but pointed towards something larger. The mission was simple help. Low-income women learn how to reclaim, restore, and revive foreclosed properties. We'd teach everything from budgeting and sourcing salvaged materials to legal frameworks for ownership. The goal wasn't just construction, it was transformation. It wasn't about flipping houses, it was about flipping narratives. I offered Rosa the first full-time role. She cried when she got her letter, then dried her tears and made me build her a desk from a reclaimed barn door. "If I'm going to work for a restoration nonprofit," she said, grinning, "I want furniture with a soul." We started small. 1 workshop, 6 women, all different stories. One had left an abusive marriage and was couch surfing with her teenage daughter. Another worked nights at a nursing home and had been denied 4 housing applications because of her credit. A third was living in her car and still showed up every morning early, ready to learn. None of them had formal experience. All of them apologized too much. They walked in with hunched shoulders, asking if they were allowed to use the tools. I told them the only requirement was that they wanted to stop asking permission. By the 3rd week, they were joking over chipped paint and sharing secrets while holding nail guns. I watched them loosen not just their grip on fear, but on the belief that they weren't capable. One afternoon, as we reattached hinges to a donated pantry door, a soft-spoken woman named Jessa looked up from her sanding block and asked, "Did someone ever try to take what you built?" I paused, then nodded. They did. She tilted her head, not judgmental, just curious. "So how'd you keep it?" I looked around at the sawdust, the scrap wood, the faces of women learning to make something out of the discarded. I thought about all the nights I spent wondering if I was being too stubborn, too alone, too foolish. "I had my own blueprint," I said. Jessa smiled. "Yeah, that's what I want. A blueprint that doesn't erase me." The phrase stuck with me. Doesn't erase me. That was the wound under all the others, wasn't it? That when Cassidy tried to take the house, it wasn't just about shingles and deed lines. It was about memory, about who got to write the story of where we came from. For so long, I'd been the helper, not the heir, the one who patched, but never inherited, the one who stayed silent. But now I was building in daylight, with witnesses, with women who had also been overlooked, underestimated, or boxed in by circumstances not of their own making. Rosa printed a vinyl sign and hung it above the tool rack. It read, "You don't need permission to restore what's yours." Below it, we tacked Polaroids, our first reclaimed window frame, our first porch step, the first workshop day where everyone left with dirt under their nails and pride on their faces. By summer, we had a wait list. Word had gotten around. A journalist asked if we were trying to level the playing field. I told her we weren't leveling it, we were teaching people to build their own. Every time I stepped into the workshop, into the hammer clatter and blueprint laughter, I felt something shift. Not just in me, in the air, in the assumption that ownership was a solo act, that survival had to be silent. I had fought to keep my house, and I won. But this was different. This was about creating a world where fewer women had to fight just to belong in the space they built with their bare hands. And maybe that's the legacy I'll care about most. Not the house, not the court letters, not even the name on the deed, but the blueprint that couldn't be stolen. The one passed on quietly, woman to woman, nail by nail. It arrived in a plain envelope, no return address, no dramatic wax seal, no certified courier signature, just my name in Cassidy's angular handwriting tilted slightly right like it always had been. The L in Lorne still looped the same way it had on birthday cards when we were kids, back when things were simpler. Or maybe just when I still believed they were. I stood at the kitchen counter for a full minute before I opened it. I didn't expect a grand apology, not after everything, not after months of silence and court threats and blog posts that hinted I was the villain in my own story. But still, something about the envelope, its weight, its deliberate neatness made my chest tighten, as if inside might be something more than ink. Maybe a truce, maybe a goodbye, or maybe just closure. I unfolded the single sheet. You kept what I couldn't. I see that now. Cassidy, no dear Kendra. No explanation, no signature flourish, just one line. One sentence with no apology, no excuses, no blame. And yet, somehow it carried the weight of everything she hadn't said, of everything I had stopped waiting for. I read it again slower, then I set the paper down beside the sink and let the silence expand around me. Rosa had left early to visit her niece. The sun had dipped just past the roofline, casting amber light through the kitchen window, catching on the edge of the dining room table. I'd built by hand. Different wood than Dad's original, but carved with the same grit and stubbornness. I walked into the living room and opened the bottom drawer of the old pine hutch. Inside was a small stack of framed photos I hadn't put up yet, some from when we were kids, others from our parents' anniversary trips before Mom's diagnosis. One picture caught my eye, Dad and Mom standing on this very porch, their arms looped around each other, paint on their jeans, exhaustion and contentment written across their faces. I traced their smiles with my eyes. Dad still had his brush in hand. Mom's hair was windblown. They looked like people who had earned their rest. I slid Cassidy's letter behind the photo and sealed it back into the frame, not to display it, not to hide it, but to place it where it belonged. Among the history, among the things that mattered, among people who saw the cracks and built anyway. Cassidy and I wouldn't be close again. I knew that. She hadn't offered an apology, hadn't addressed the manipulation, the lawyers, the passive-aggressive Instagram stories. But she had said one thing that was honest. You kept what I couldn't, and that was enough. Because in those 7 words, she'd finally seen the difference. That ownership didn't come from blood or sentiment. It came from effort, from stewardship, from showing up when the roof leaked and the bills piled and the siding rotted and no one else cared. From loving something long enough to rescue it when everyone else had given up. It was never about winning, it was about keeping. And I had. I walked to the front door and opened it as a breeze pushed in, carrying the scent of turned soil from the garden beds we'd built for the design-forward workshops. We'd planted tomatoes and herbs last weekend, laughing over mismatched gloves and muddy shoes. The women would return tomorrow, sleeves rolled, sanding old shutters, cutting beams, sipping sun tea out of reused jelly jars. Some of them didn't believe they belonged here yet, but I did. I hoped one day when their own homes stood finished and no one questioned their right to be there, they would remember this porch, this breeze, this beginning. I leaned against the doorframe and looked out across the yard. The house didn't just look different now. It felt different. Lighter, settled, whole, Because home wasn't about inheritance, and it wasn't about history either. It was about what you protected, what you nurtured in the quiet, what you rebuilt when no one else saw value. Cassidy had once stood here, too entitled, confident, convinced she could reclaim it with the right words, the right angle, the right legal angle. But I had stood here with a hammer in one hand and a blueprint in the other. And when the dust settled, it wasn't a name that had held this place together. It was hands. Mine. I stepped back inside, closed the door softly, and let the lock click shut. Not as a rejection, but as a choice. A full stop. I picked up my notebook from the console table and wrote one final thought at the bottom of the page where I'd been keeping quotes for the design forward mission. Maybe blood doesn't entitle you to a home, but building it piece by piece just might.